The Mafia boss found her dragged to the kitchen by her manager. What he did next made everyone cry. The yelling hit first, sharp enough to slice through every other sound in the kitchen. The manager's voice roared as he dragged her by the arm, slamming her against the tiled wall exactly the way you see in the image. His grip tightened, humiliation burning her cheeks as he screamed at her, spit flying, calling her useless, worthless, and a burden. She tried to pull away, but he yanked harder, jerking her forward as she cried out, the scene escalating exactly from the moment shown, the moment she had never imagined her life would sink low enough to reach. And she didn't know yet that the Mafia boss standing in the shadows of that same kitchen was about to change her life forever. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, what time it is in your city right now. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and get ready because this story is about to explode. She stood there, trembling, unable to understand how everything had gone from bad to worse in just a single shift. Her name was Elena, and she had been holding herself together with nothing more than stubbornness and a paycheck barely enough to survive. The manager had been on her case for weeks, pushing, tormenting, and belittling her while the owner turned a blind eye. She had endured it all because quitting meant losing the tiny room she rented, losing her only source of income, losing the last piece of stability she still had. But today, the manager wasn't looking for an excuse. He was looking for a victim. It started that morning when the restaurant got slammed with customers, the lunch rush hitting harder than usual. Plates kept piling up, orders shouted across steaming pans, stress radiating through the building. Elena moved as fast as she could, carrying trays, wiping tables, keeping her smile steady even when exhaustion gnawed at her. But one mistake, one plate dropped on the floor, was enough to send her manager into a frenzy. He waited until she entered the back hallway, then grabbed her arm, dragging her through the kitchen while cooks froze mid-chop, pretending they saw nothing. Humiliation burned deeply, like he intended to strip away every ounce of dignity she still had left. But on the far side of the kitchen stood a man in a black suit, tattoos crawling across his neck and chest, gold rings glinting under the fluorescent lights. A stranger to everyone except the owner, who knew exactly who and what he was. A Mafia boss whose presence alone could silence a room. His name was Marcello, and though he had come for business, what he saw made his blood run cold. While the manager shoved her again, Elena tried to steady her voice, tried to make him stop, but he just gripped her harder, yelling even louder. The cooks looked away. No one moved. No one dared. Except him. Marcello took a single step forward, quiet but deadly. His gaze locked onto the manager's hand, as if it were the only thing in existence. He didn't speak. He didn't warn. He simply moved like a storm breaking loose. In a heartbeat, he was there, grabbing the manager by the wrist with a force that made bones crack. The manager screamed and stumbled back, the confident tyrant suddenly reduced to a trembling coward. Elena gasped, stunned by the shift, by the way Marcello placed himself between her and the man who had tormented her. It wasn't just strength, it was fury, cold and controlled, the kind that made everyone in the kitchen back away. Marcello didn't need to raise his voice. His silence alone was enough to make the room suffocate. The manager stuttered, tried to defend himself, tried to play innocent, but Marcello stepped closer until the man nearly tripped over his own feet. And that was the moment Elena realized she wasn't just dealing with someone powerful. She was dealing with someone whose presence commanded the entire world to stop. She didn't know why this stranger cared. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know that this moment would mark the exact point her life pivoted into a completely different direction. But she knew one thing. He wasn't letting her fall again. Her legs shook beneath her. She tried to catch her breath, the adrenaline mixing with fear and confusion. Marcello turned to her, and for a split second, she saw something she didn't expect: concern. Genuine, piercing concern. Not pity, not judgment. Just a man seeing someone who had been pushed too far. He told her quietly to breathe, and though he didn't touch her, she felt steady for the first time in months. The manager, humiliated and enraged, tried to regain control, but Marcello wasn't interested in hearing excuses. He walked past him, grabbed the phone from the wall, and called the owner directly. Voices rose on the other line, arguments flaring, but Marcelo shut them down with a single threat. Within minutes, the owner rushed in, sweating, apologizing, firing the manager on the spot. Not out of morality, but out of fear. Elena watched it all unfold, her heart pounding, her mind unable to comprehend how one moment of humiliation turned into someone else fighting for her. She kept waiting to wake up, to realize she was imagining this, because life had never been on her side like this. But it was real. Marcelo was real, and his presence made everyone in the restaurant walk differently, talk differently, breathe differently. Once things calmed, he walked her outside, away from the chaos. She didn't know what to say, but the silence between them felt safe. He asked if she had anyone to call, anywhere to go, but she shook her head. Her life outside work was as empty as her pockets. Marcelo nodded once, as if he had expected that answer, then told her she wasn't going back into that kitchen again. Those words hit her like a shockwave. No one had ever intervened for her. No one had ever cared enough to take action. She tried to thank him, voice trembling, but he stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers in a way that settled her nerves. He told her she deserved better than what she had just endured, better than what this place had given her. She didn't know why he believed that. She didn't know why she felt something ignite in her chest when he looked at her. But she did. Marcelo wasn't done with her story. He was only at the beginning of it. He pulled out his phone again and made another call, this one calmer, quieter. Within 10 minutes, a black SUV pulled up to the restaurant, sleek and intimidating. Two men stepped out, ones who clearly answered to him. He asked Elena to come with them, but not in a forceful way, in a way that told her she had a choice. For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't trapping her. Someone was offering her a way out. She hesitated, the weight of fear and hope battling inside her. Going with him meant stepping into a world she didn't understand. Staying meant going back to the same pain that had nearly broken her. She took a breath. Then she stepped forward. Marcelo opened the door for her himself, and she climbed in. The moment it shut, her old life stayed behind. No one inside that kitchen knew what she would become. No one knew the woman who had been crying against the tiled wall would soon return not as a waitress, but as the new owner. No one knew the Mafia boss who saved her that day would become the most unexpected part of her future, not just in business, but in love. And as the SUV pulled away, Elena looked out the window, tears drying on her cheeks, realizing her life had just taken a turn she could never have imagined, a turn fueled by fire, by rage, and by the dangerous man who had stepped in when the world turned its back on her. The SUV carried her away from everything she had ever known, and Elena kept her eyes glued to the restaurant shrinking in the distance. The same place where she had cried, where she had been dragged, where she had been broken piece by piece until Marcelo stepped in and shattered the chains she didn't even realize she'd been carrying. Her heart raced as she sat in the back seat, hands trembling in her lap, the weight of the moment still pressing against her ribs. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't know what she was stepping into. She only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing about her life was ever going to be the same again. Marcelo sat beside her, silent but powerful, his presence filling the entire space even though he hadn't said a single word since they left. She could feel the heat of him, the steady force of someone who didn't just walk into a room but dominated it without trying. Every time she glanced at him, she found herself looking away quickly, trying to calm the storm inside her. She didn't understand why she felt safer near a man who radiated danger like a second skin. She only knew she couldn't stop breathing him in. Her thoughts spun in dozens of directions, everything happening too fast. She had left the restaurant. She had walked away from the job she clung to for survival. She had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her, guided by a man she barely knew. The uncertainty pressed against her chest, but so did something else, relief. A guilty, trembling relief that someone had finally seen her suffering and refused to let it continue. The car slowed, turning into a gated property that made Elena's pulse spike. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't prepared for the speed of it, the power of it, The way Marcelo's world swept her up like a wave determined to drag her somewhere she couldn't escape. But he didn't force her. That was the part that confused her most. For all his terrifying edges, he let her choose every step she took. The door opened, and Marcelo stepped out first, extending his hand for her to follow. She hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand into his. His grip was warm, steady grounding. He didn't pull. He guided, with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his appearance. Inside, he led her to a private room, quietly telling one of his men to bring water and a first aid kit. She realized then that her arms still throbbed from where the manager had grabbed her. The bruise would be ugly. The memory would be worse. But the moment she sank into the soft couch, she felt her chest loosen for the first time that day. Marcelo knelt beside her, rolling up her sleeve gently to inspect the reddened skin. His intensity didn't fade, but it shifted, focused entirely on her pain, not the violence that caused it. The silence between them carried weight, a heavy mix of unspoken questions and emotions neither of them knew how to name yet. He didn't look away from the bruise. She didn't look away from him. Something tethered them in that stillness, fragile but powerful, like the beginning of a storm. She wanted to thank him again, but the words stuck in her throat. Everything felt too big, too overwhelming, and her voice refused to cooperate. Instead, she watched as he stood, giving orders to his men with a calm authority that made the whole building shift around him. Elena had never seen someone command a room without raising their voice, but Marcelo didn't need to raise his voice. People listened. People obeyed. People respected him, feared him, trusted him, and she couldn't understand why a man like that had stepped in for someone like her. When he returned to her side, he asked if she had somewhere safe to go for the night. She shook her head, feeling the sting of embarrassment creep into her chest. She didn't want him to think she was helpless, even though she was. She didn't want him to see how close she had come to breaking, even though he already had. Marcelo studied her for a long moment, then told her she could stay here for the night. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a command either. It was an offering. She should have said no. She should have run. She should have protected herself from stepping deeper into a world built on shadows. But she was tired. She was hurt. She was done pretending she could keep surviving alone. So she nodded. Marcelo exhaled, a subtle but noticeable relief flickering across his face. He stepped back, giving her space, telling one of his men to prepare a guest room. Elena watched him, trying to understand why a stranger would go this far for her. But as he turned to walk away, she felt a weight tug at her chest, a pull she didn't want to acknowledge yet. She didn't want him to go, didn't want the space between them to widen. But Marcelo didn't leave the room completely. He paused at the doorway, glanced back at her, and for the first time since they met, his hardened expression softened, not with pity, but with something warmer, something that made her toes curl and her pulse trip over itself. She looked down immediately, unable to hold his gaze without feeling like her soul was being read. The hours passed slowly after that. She lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the thoughts ricocheting inside her. She pressed her fingers to the bruised skin on her arm, remembering the way Marcelo's hand had replaced her manager's grip, gentle where the other had been cruel. She replayed the moment he stepped in, the way his eyes had burned with fury, the way he had looked at her as if she mattered. She had never mattered to anyone like that before. Sleep came only in fragments, jolted by dreams of the kitchen, of the shouting, of Marcelo's shadow looming behind her like a shield. She woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door, steady, heavy, controlled. Her heart leapt because she knew exactly who it was. She sat up, waiting without understanding why she expected him to enter. He didn't. The footsteps passed. A small, strange ache formed at her chest. By morning, she felt more tired than when she'd arrived. She washed her face, tied her hair back, and wandered into the hallway, unsure if she was even allowed to roam freely. But Marcelo appeared almost instantly, as if drawn to the sound of her movements. He stopped in front of her, assessing her carefully, searching her face for signs of fear or discomfort. She assured him she was fine, but her voice wavered. Marcelo's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in a protective way that made her knees go weak. He asked if she was ready to talk about what happened. She wasn't. Not yet. But she tried. Words came out in broken pieces, the humiliation still raw, still sharp. She told him how long the manager had been tormenting her, how she had stayed because she needed the money, because she had no one else, because life had cornered her until she had no choice but to endure. Marcelo listened, not with impatience, but with a stillness that told her he wasn't just hearing her. He was absorbing every word, every detail, every wound she revealed. When she finished, he didn't speak at first. His jaw clenched, his hands flexing at his sides, as if he were fighting the urge to crush something. She had seen anger before, but never anger like his, anger that didn't explode outward, but gathered like thunder waiting to break. He told her she deserved better. He told her she should never have been in that position. He told her he wouldn't let it happen again. And for the first time in her life, someone's promise felt real. The next hours unfolded faster than she could process. Marcelo made calls. Meetings were arranged, decisions made. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. He was taking action. He wasn't letting what happened slide. And he wasn't doing it out of pity. He was doing it because he cared. She didn't know why. She didn't know how, but she felt it with every breath. He returned to her later, telling her something she didn't expect. He had arranged for her to get a new job if she wanted it. A safe one, a good one where no one would ever lay a hand on her. But she didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. A new job wasn't enough. A life built on surviving wasn't enough. She wanted something she had never dared to admit before. She wanted a rise. Marcelo saw the conflict in her eyes and stepped closer, close enough that she felt the heat of him again. He told her he could help her do more than just survive. He could help her build something bigger, something powerful, something that no one could take from her ever again. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to carry the weight of the opportunity he was offering. But the fire inside her, the one that had been smothered for years, flickered back to life. And when she looked at Marcelo, she saw not a dangerous man she should avoid, but the only person who had ever seen her worth. He held her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. And in that unspoken moment, Elena realized something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She wasn't just stepping into his world. She was becoming a part of it. Marcelo's words hung between them like a lit fuse, quiet but burning with possibility. Elena felt them sink into her chest, stirring something she hadn't felt in years. Ambition. Real ambition. Not the desperate kind where she prayed to survive the week, but the fierce kind that whispered maybe she could become someone powerful, someone respected, someone untouchable. The thought terrified her. The thought thrilled her. And Marcelo watched every flicker of emotion cross her face, as if he were reading the exact moment she decided her old life was dead. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He could see the decision forming in her eyes long before she understood herself. He didn't push. He didn't pressure. He simply told her there was more he needed to show her. Then he walked, expecting her to follow, and she did because something invisible tethered her to him now. Dangerous, magnetic, undeniable. Her steps quickened to match his, her pulse racing with every breath. She was stepping deeper into his world, deeper than she realized, deeper than she could ever turn back from. He led her into a room where several of his men were gathered, tall and stone-faced, every one of them turning toward her with surprise, confusion, and something else, respect. Not because of who she was, but because of who she stood next to. Marcelo didn't introduce her. He didn't explain. He just placed a hand subtly behind her back, not touching her, but close enough that she felt protected, claimed, shielded. The air shifted instantly. His men straightened. Their eyes softened. Whatever this was between her and Marcelo, they recognized the significance before she did. He discussed business, his voice controlled, powerful, issuing instructions without hesitation. Elena listened, trying to make sense of the dangerous world unfolding around her. Money, territory, negotiations that sounded more like threats, deals that made her stomach twist. She had stepped into a realm where one wrong move could end someone's life. But Marcelo never lost control. He navigated every moment like a man who had been born to dominate, bending the world to his will simply by existing. And the strangest part? She wasn't scared of him. She felt safer beside him than she had ever felt alone. Hours passed, and Marcelo finally dismissed his men. As soon as they left, he turned to her, his gaze sharper than before. He asked if she understood what stepping into his world really meant. She swallowed, unable to form words, because the truth was complicated. She didn't understand everything. She didn't understand the weight of his power, the danger of his enemies, the shadows that followed him. But she understood he had saved her. She understood he saw something in her worth fighting for. She understood he was offering her a chance to climb out of the life that had suffocated her for years. And she wanted that chance, even if it scared her. He told her he had one last thing to show her today, something important. Without explaining further, he led her outside again, into another car. Not the SUV from before, something faster, darker, fueled by danger instead of protection. She slid inside, and Marcelo got behind the wheel himself. That alone set her pulse racing. This wasn't business. This was personal. He drove with precision, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, the veins on his forearm standing out in a way that made her eyes linger. She hated that she noticed. She hated that she felt warmth bloom in her stomach whenever he moved. She hated that her body reacted to him long before her mind caught up. But she didn't look away. She watched him the way someone watches a fire, knowing it could burn, but unable to resist the pull. They reached a small commercial district, quiet and unsuspecting, nothing like the intimidating world Marcelo commanded. He parked the car and stepped out, motioning for her to follow. Her confusion grew with every step. What was he trying to show her? Why bring her here? And he stopped in front of a building she knew too well. The restaurant. Her heart dropped. She couldn't breathe. She didn't want to go inside. She didn't want to remember the pain. She didn't want to face the humiliation still lingering in those walls. She shook her head, stepping back instinctively, but Marcelo gently caught her wrist, not tight, not forceful, just enough to keep her grounded. He told her she wasn't going in to relive anything. She was going in to reclaim power she didn't know she had. She didn't believe it until they stepped through the door. Everything froze. Employees stiffened. Eyes widened. Conversations died mid-sentence. The owner rushed out from the office, already sweating, already terrified. Marcelo didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats. He simply stated that the manager had been dealt with, permanently removed from the business. The owner stammered apologies, promises, desperate pleas to keep things peaceful. Marcelo let him ramble for a few seconds before cutting him off with a look that nearly made the man collapse. Then he turned to Elena, and what he said next shattered her world. He told the owner she would no longer be working here. Not because she quit, not because she was fired, but because he was buying the restaurant and putting in her name. Everything inside her turned to static. The room tilted. She stared at him, shocked beyond comprehension. He spoke casually, as if this wasn't life-changing, as if handing her the keys to her freedom was just another part of his day. The owner tried to argue, but Marcelo's men appeared like shadows behind him, silencing every attempt. In minutes, her entire future was rewritten. The owner signed the documents. Marcelo stood behind her the whole time, solid and silent, radiating a confidence she borrowed just by being near him. When the papers were handed to her, her shaking fingers touched her new reality for the first time. Her name, her signature, ownership, a place she had once suffered in, a place she had cried in, a place she thought she'd never escape, now belonged to her. Emotion hit hard, slamming in her chest so violently she had to grip the counter to steady herself. She had spent her whole life believing she didn't deserve more than scraps. She had convinced herself she should be grateful for survival. But Marcelo had seen someone stronger in her, someone capable of rising, building, conquering. And now she had proof he wasn't wrong. She stepped outside with him once everything was finalized, the papers in her hand feeling heavier than bricks. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, collapse, or scream. Her emotions tangled into knots she couldn't undo. Marcelo watched her carefully, his eyes softer than the world ever got to see. She didn't notice she was crying until he reached out and brushed his thumb gently beneath her eye, catching the tear before it fell. The touch lit her nerves on fire. She froze, breath trapped in her throat, heart pounding so loudly she was sure he heard it. Marcelo didn't move away. His hand lingered, warm against her skin, his thumb tracing the faint trail of her tears. She didn't pull back. She didn't want to. She wanted more. She hated that she wanted more. She hated that she craved him like air. She hated that he made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten existed. He lowered his hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact. She exhaled shakily, unable to look away from him. Something dangerous and magnetic passed between them, a current so strong she felt it in her bones. Marcelo didn't say anything, but his eyes told her everything. He wasn't just helping her. He was becoming tied to her, more than he should be, more than he expected to be, more than either of them could stop. She swallowed hard, gripping the papers tighter, trying to steady the storm building inside her. But before she could speak, Marcelo leaned in slightly. Not enough to touch her again, not enough to cross a line, but close enough that she felt his breath brush her cheek. He told her this was only the beginning. A warning, a promise, a prophecy. Her knees nearly buckled. He stepped back then, giving her space, giving her air, giving her a moment to catch up to the whirlwind he had created around her. But Elena knew, deep in her chest, that she was far past the point of catching up. This wasn't a story she was watching unfold. This was a story she was being pulled into, by him, by fate, by something she didn't understand but couldn't resist. Because Marcelo hadn't just bought her a restaurant. He had bought her future. And with every breath she took, she felt herself falling further into a world where danger and desire walked hand in hand, and falling deeper into him. The alley behind the club fell into a brutal silence, the kind that presses on your ears and makes your heartbeat sound like a drumline. Cassandra stood frozen, the phone still in her hand, Leo's voice echoing in her skull, telling her to stay alive, telling her he was coming, telling her he wasn't leaving her alone in this war. The echo vibrated through her bones even as the men in the shadows closed in. The ones who thought they had won because they'd cornered her, because they had no idea what kind of storm Leo had turned her into. She watched their slow approach, the cruel smirks, the confident swagger of men who believed fear should already be dripping from her like sweat. But she wasn't afraid. She was boiling. She was done running. She was ready to set herself on fire if it meant taking each of them with her. And they didn't realize it until she took her first step forward instead of back, a move so unexpected it knocked the breath out of their confidence. The man closest to her blinked, thrown off, and in that split second of hesitation, she darted toward him, shoulder slamming into his ribs hard enough to make his body twist. He reached for her wrist, but she twisted under his arm, swinging her elbow into his jaw with so much force that his teeth clicked. The second one lunged at her with a grunt, but she'd already grabbed the fallen man's own knife from his belt, the blade slick and cold against her palm as she sliced it across the air in warning. She didn't need to touch them yet. She just needed to let them feel the shift. She wasn't prey anymore. She wasn't a victim begging for mercy. She was a problem now. Their problem. And before they could gather themselves, a sharp screech of tires tore through the night as headlights exploded across the alley. A black SUV barreled toward them, so fast Cassandra braced herself for impact, but the vehicle screeched to a halt inches from her side. The door flung open. Leo stepped out. Not walked. Stepped. Like the universe parted for him. Like the night rearranged itself around his rage. His eyes were already locked on her, sweeping her body with a speed that was soft and violent at the same time, checking if she was hurt. When he saw the blood on her arm, a muscle in his jaw twitched. Cassandra whispered that it wasn't hers, and something in Leo cracked open like a fissure in the earth. The men who had chased her hesitated for the first time. Good. They should. Leo moved toward Cassandra, and pulled her behind him with one hand while the other rolled his sleeves up past his forearms like he was preparing to carve the night open. The first man charged him, thinking he could get the drop on a man too focused on his woman. Wrong. Leo intercepted him mid-lunge, grabbing his shirt front with a grip that folded the man in half. He slammed him into the ground so hard the concrete cracked under the impact. Another man tried to attack from the side, but Leo shifted his stance and caught his punch, twisting his wrist until the bones popped like dry sticks. The scream echoed off the walls, but Leo didn't even blink. Cassandra watched with her heart ricocheting against her ribs. She knew Leo was dangerous. She'd heard whispers, warnings, rumors. But seeing him like this storm unleashed for her, this fury sharpened for her, this terrifying love carved out of violence and devotion, made the air vibrate around her. The last man standing tried to grab her from behind, dragging her hair, yanking her backward before she could react. The pain shot through her scalp, and her body jerked. Leo turned so fast she barely saw him move. 1 second the man had her, the next Leo was ripping him off her like he was peeling a sticker from a wall. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He threw the man against the brick with a force that rattled the trash cans and knocked dust loose from the upstairs window frames. The man slid down the wall like wet laundry, unconscious before he hit the ground. Cassandra stared as Leo stepped back, chest heaving, hands shaking with leftover rage. He didn't look at the men he'd taken down. He looked at her, only her, as if he just fought the whole alley for the right to breathe the same air she did. She whispered that she was okay, and those words, those small, trembling, stubborn words, hit him harder than any punch ever could. He stepped closer, slow, cautious, like she might break if he reached too fast. She didn't wait for him. She moved first, her fingers curling into the front of his shirt, pulling herself against the solid, burning heat of him. He held her, arms tight around her waist, forehead pressed to her temple, breath shaking against her skin. Not because he was scared, but because he had been close, too close, to losing her before she'd even become fully his. He wasn't letting that happen again. Cassandra felt his heartbeat pounding like war drums against her chest as he whispered that they had to move. The city wasn't safe anymore. His enemies had crossed a line, and Leo intended to erase the entire line from the earth. He helped her into the SUV, sliding in beside her instead of the front seat, as if letting her out of reach for even 1 second was a risk he wasn't willing to take. His hand rested on her thigh while the driver sped away, the city lights flickering across Leo's bruised knuckles. Cassandra kept her gaze locked on him because she could feel something shifting, not just around them, inside him. He wasn't acting like the man who owned half the city. He was acting like the man who feared losing one woman more than losing every empire he built. They drove through a part of the city Cassandra didn't recognize, deeper and darker, until the SUV pulled inside a secured compound that felt nothing like Leo's polished world. This was raw, brutal, a place built for war. As soon as the doors opened, heavily armed men approached. Men Leo trusted enough to let them see his expression, which was one heartbeat away from murder. Cassandra stepped out first, refusing to look shaken even though her body buzzed with the crash after adrenaline. Leo hovered behind her like a shadow made of fire. One of the men reported that the attackers had been traced back to someone inside Leo's own organization. Betrayal. The words sliced the space between them like a blade. Leo's entire body tightened. He didn't explode. He didn't roar. He didn't make threats. He just told them to bring the traitor to him alive. Cassandra had never heard a quieter order. She'd also never heard one more deadly. Inside the compound's safe house, Leo finally let himself breathe long enough to sit her down and clean the dried blood on her arm. His hands were steady, controlled, careful in a way that didn't match the violence she'd just seen him unleash. Cassandra told him she wasn't weak. She told him she wasn't going to be hidden. He didn't argue. He just lifted his gaze and stared at her like she'd become the most dangerous force in his life. She insisted that whoever targeted her wanted leverage. And she didn't want to be leverage. She wanted to be a weapon beside him. The way Leo inhaled at those words made her pulse jump. He pulled her closer, so close she could feel the tremble he'd been holding back since the alley, and he whispered that if she stood beside him, there'd be no going back. No safety, no normal life, no pretending, just war. And him. Cassandra didn't flinch. She moved closer. For the first time that night, Leo smiled. Not the charming one, not the calculated one, the dangerous one, because she had just chosen him. Not the empire, not the fear. Him. A knock slammed against the door. One of Leo's men reported that they had the traitor. Leo stood, eyes blazing, and Cassandra rose with him before he could tell her to stay behind. She wasn't hiding anymore. The fire was already burning, and she intended to walk straight into it beside him as the compound door opened, revealing the man who betrayed Leo's empire and endangered her life. And the night cracked wide open again. The moment she said she didn't want to be saved anymore, everything inside him froze and then detonated at the same time. He stared at her like her words had struck deeper than any bullet ever had. She repeated it with her voice shaking, that she was done hiding behind him, done letting him fight every battle, done letting people think she was fragile. She said she needed to stand on her own feet even if she was trembling on them, and that the only way to win wasn't to run, but to face everything head on. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. It was like she had slapped him and hugged him in the same second. But before he could respond, the door behind them burst open, and the manager stumbled inside, tied and gagged exactly where Leo's men had dropped him. He looked up at her with that same arrogant glint, like he expected fear to crawl back into her veins. She felt something inside her rise so sharply it surprised even her. She stepped past Leo, even though his hand instinctively reached for her. She walked straight to the man who had dragged her through that kitchen, who had made her feel small, who had made her believe she would never be anything. She crouched down in front of him, her pulse wild and her breath unsteady. She whispered that she wasn't afraid anymore and that he didn't own a single piece of her life ever again. The man struggled like he wanted to spit bitterness at her, but she didn't flinch. She stood back up, feeling a power she had never recognized in herself. Leo watched her like he was seeing her for the first time, not the injured girl he saved, but the woman who could run beside him. The next hours moved like fire racing through dry grass. The police arrived. The neighbors gathered. Everyone wanted answers because the restaurant would never reopen as long as the man who managed it was still breathing the same air as the people he had exploited, threatened, and abused. Leo didn't interfere. He didn't bribe. He didn't manipulate the situation. For once, he let things unfold without bending the world to his will, because he wanted her victory to be clean. He wanted her freedom to taste pure. The manager was arrested on charges that piled like a mountain. Fraud, assault, illegal wage siphoning, harassment, threats, blackmail. The officers looked at her differently than they ever had. They saw not a victim, but a force that had finally snapped every chain placed around her. Leo drove her away from the scene, silently gripping the wheel with knuckles white as marble. When they reached the penthouse, she collapsed into him before he even turned off the engine. She cried not from pain, but from exhaustion, from relief from the release of everything she'd bottled up while clawing her way through that nightmare. He didn't speak. He just held her until her heartbeat steadied against his chest. But the world didn't slow down. If anything, it sped up. Within days, she met with lawyers, accountants, inspectors. The case against the manager grew stronger and uglier as more employees came forward. Every story made her chest tighten because she had lived those same moments. She had been another number on his list of people to control, but now she was the reason he would never get the chance again. Leo watched her run meetings, negotiate terms, argue with officials, and he kept thinking this woman could command an empire if she wanted to. She didn't need anyone to hand her power. She only needed a platform big enough to unleash it. And that's exactly what he intended to build for her. The day of the auction felt like a movie playing too fast. The restaurant went on sale as part of the seized assets. A crowd gathered. Investors, opportunists, people who wanted to profit from the collapse of a corrupt man. She arrived wearing the same calm determination she had found the night she confronted him. Leo stood behind her, silent but burning with pride. When the bidding started, she didn't hesitate. She raised her paddle with a confidence that echoed through the entire room. The price climbed. Competitors tried to snatch it away. She didn't blink. Leo didn't say a word, but everyone in that room knew that crossing her now meant declaring war on the wrong man. The final number hit the screen. She didn't flinch. She claimed it. And just like at the place, she had been humiliated and belonged to her. The first time she walked back into the building, she expected the ghosts of her old fear to cling to her. But instead, she felt fire. She saw walls that needed to come down, floors that needed to be replaced, appliances that needed to be burned and buried. She walked through that same kitchen where her manager dragged her, and instead of memories, she saw potential. She saw a future. She saw herself. Workers filled the space, tearing out everything rotten and rebuilding every inch under her command. The restaurant took shape like it was rising from ashes. Not his ashes, but hers. The ashes of who she used to be. The grand opening came faster than anyone expected. News spread everywhere that the new owner was the woman who had taken back her dignity, her career, her future. Cameras showed up. Crowds lined the sidewalk. Leo stood inside, dressed sharp, but proud in a way he didn't bother hiding. When she stepped out in her uniform, her design, her vision, her brand, the crowd erupted. She felt her throat tighten because she had dreamed of moments like this, but never believed she could touch them. She opened the doors to her own place. Not the one where she was dragged, humiliated, and silenced. This one was alive with her identity, her courage, her growth. Leo followed her in quietly, placing a small box in her hand. She opened it to find the original name tag she once wore, broken, bent, and dented. Except now, it was framed in gold and engraved with one sentence. You rose. Her breath hitched. She didn't need a fairy tale proposal. She didn't need promises. She needed someone who saw her fully, completely, fiercely. Someone who didn't try to rescue her, but stood behind her while she rescued herself. She kissed him with every emotion that had been building from the moment he found her in that kitchen. He kissed her back like he had always known this was where they were heading. As the night took over, customers filled her restaurant. Everyone wanted to taste what a rebirth felt like. She walked through the tables, smiling, greeting, laughing. At one point, she looked toward the doorway where the manager had once dragged her, and she felt nothing. No fear, no tremor, only triumph. Later, Leo took her hand and pulled her into his arms in a quiet corner. He told her she didn't just win, she conquered. He told her he wasn't proud because she survived, but because she transformed. She rested her forehead against his chest and whispered that she never could have done any of it without him. He shook his head because he knew the truth. She had always been this powerful. He had only watched the fire ignite. The night ended with her standing in the doorway of her restaurant, lights glowing behind her, future stretching ahead of her, heart steady for the first time in years. She wasn't the girl dragged across a kitchen floor anymore. She was a force that would never be stepped on again. And Leo stood beside her, not as a savior, but as a partner ready to face everything that came next. She rose from humiliation to power, from fear to fire, from victim to visionary. She took back everything stolen from her and rebuilt her world with her own hands. Her story proves that strength grows in the places once broken. When life drags you down, fight back, rise harder, and rewrite your ending. Subscribe for more intense stories, comment your thoughts, share to inspire someone, and stay tuned because the next explosive story drops soon.